Well, welcome everybody to the UECNA webinar. We're really pleased to have Nicole Porter and Paul Hooper speaking. Both Nicole and Paul have spoken before, and their webinars were watched by a huge number of people. Because as you know, we record the webinars, and so people in Australia, where I think it's very early in the morning, can watch it when they wake up, and elsewhere in the world as well. Now, the topic I think is a really interesting one and a really topical one because, as you know, flight paths are changing at all airports across the world. And in many airports, they have changed. We've heard from Elaine in New York in the past how they haven't really worked out at all in America. But I think what's interesting about Nicole and Paul's presentation is that they actually did a study going out to ask real people, real residents under flight paths, what they would like to see from the new flight paths. And this is rarely done. And that's why I thought it'd be really interesting for people to hear the results of their work. Now, Nicole will be familiar to many of you. She's an acoustic director at Anderson Acoustics, which is based in Brighton in England. She's a leading expert on the impacts of aviation noise with over 35 years experience in the field. And she has worked extensively with communities impacted by aircraft noise. Paul, her co-presenter, will join us a little bit later. He's on an English train, and English trains are notoriously late, and this one is no exception. But I'll introduce Paul now. He is the Professor of Environment Management and Sustainability at Manchester Metropolitan University. He was a leading contributor to the Europe-wide ANIMA study that looked at ways to cut the impact of aircraft noise on local communities. So both Nicole and Paul have had vast experience in communicating with local communities, and that's a large part of the study which they're going to talk about today. The presentation will be a little bit longer than normal because we've got two people speaking. So it'll be about 35 to 40 minutes, which still leaves us plenty of time for questions and discussion, because I think there probably will be quite a lot of discussion. Well, Nicole, it's over to you, and fingers crossed that Paul will arrive, or the train will arrive before you finish. If not, we can take a break and have a discussion on your presentation, and then he can present a little bit later on. So it's good to see you. It's good to welcome you back, Nicole.
Thank you. I'm slightly worried when you say 35 years because in my head I'm still 21. So there you go. There you go. And actually, our presentation, I kind of normally top and tail it. Paul does the hard bit in the middle, but it's all right. I can do the hard bit in the middle. It's just we normally share it. So I'm hoping Paul will turn up. But we did magic the presentation on my computer, so I'm going to share it now, and hopefully it'll appear. Hang on, test desktop and share. And does that work for you?
It works very well. We can see it very clearly, Nicole.
Okay, and can you don't really want to see all yourselves either, so hopefully you can see everything there. So I'm assuming everything is working unless I hear otherwise. Good.
And just before Nicole speaks, um, if you're going to make a noise or there's a background noise in your room, do turn yourself onto mute. Otherwise, you can keep your cameras on and your voice unmuted. But if you're going to make a noise, or if the children are going to make a noise, or whatever, turn yourself onto mute. Thanks very much. On you go, Nicole.
There we go. Right. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me, John, and your team to present this work that we've been doing. It's actually about a research project which is about exploring the concept of fair and equitable distribution. That's what the Fed is. And it's about the research we did into minimizing social unacceptability of airspace design options. So we've kind of prefaced that back to the title of what does Fed mean for airspace modernization? And I know a lot of I've been listening over the time, hearing people's experiences and hearing about metrics and people's not being happy with some of the metrics that were used and some of the PBN implementations that have been done. I'm just going to hide. There we go. That's better. You don't want to look at yourselves, do you? And I think so hopefully this will continue that conversation from some of the previous presentations that have been done and seems to be fairly topical. Right, now I'm hoping, let's say, there we go. Paul will be turning up.
Well,
And
Paul has just
oh,
arrived. You'll
is
be
he
glad to
right?
hear.
Fantastic, Paul. So he was going to be running the slideshow, so I've managed to get that up and working. So what I'm going to go through is a bit of the background to the research, the objectives, and the approach. So I'm going to set the scene. We're going to talk through the community focus groups and a little bit about the supplementary assessment framework that we've introduced, and then put together some recommendations and next steps. Now Paul's arrived, I can let on that I'm doing the easy bit at the beginning, the Fed to a background, and the recommendations and next steps. And Paul will be doing the more difficult bit in the middle. We didn't draw short, we should have drawn straws, shouldn't we, Paul? So I'm just going to tell you a little bit here about what this work was and why we did it. So what I would say, there's quite a lot of information in these slides, and I'm sure the slides will be distributed afterwards.
Yeah.
But there is a full report called CAP 2971. So this is like a little mini report, but if you want further details, you can just search for that online and you'll be able to find it. So if you miss some of the details, don't worry. And so the setting for this scene is that the campaign groups around Gatwick Airport have been advocating for fair and equitable distribution, the Fed, in relation to aircraft noise, and its policy sought since 2016. And the CAA, it's the UK's Civil Aviation Authority framework, the CAP 16 framework, prioritizes reducing significant adverse effects of noise, which can result in concentrated aircraft routes. And as you probably realise, been met with various levels of adverse local community response. In the UK, the current policy kind of lacks specific guidance on and how you concentrate the routes. It's been focusing instead on kind of just mitigating the aviation noise impacts as a totality. So we're trying to get in there and I suppose not recreate a lot of what's happened in the US, where a lot of the routes were introduced, everything was concentrated, but looking at airspace design and looking at different options and look at how fairly you might actually use these routes. So, talking about distributing along different routes. So the purpose for the work was really to understand how airspace design options can influence the features that impact perception of fairness and equity, and that's to inform a more socially acceptable airspace modernisation. I kind of swing that round on its head and probably say less socially unacceptable airspace modernisation from the point of view of communities. So the objective there is to conduct an in-depth qualitative, not quantitative, but qualitative assessment, working directly with the aviation and community stakeholders, so we can actually find out and define the performance features and their metrics that actually influence the perception of fairness. I think it's probably worth saying as well, we are researchers, Paul and I, and there was our team around us as well. We're just the two on the team on this call. Um, we're not about making decisions. We're about producing the research, putting it out there for the policymakers to make those decisions. So we can just provide the insights and make recommendations, but the outcome of the work is not really with us and how it's going to be applied. But one of the things we wanted to do first of all was go back to some social justice research. Um, so this has been, it's quite topical and it's becoming more topical. And we wanted to ground all of this in academic research, things that have been published in the past and already have an academic robust base to it. So we pulled out three different types of fairness when we were doing our work. The first one being the distributional fairness. So this is, I suppose if you think about it as the distribution of aircraft and noise on a map. So with aviation noise decisions, this relates to the individual response or judgment on the fairness of, and I'll say the change in distribution of overflights or noise burden across a geographical area, weighing up the benefits and disbenefits of that change. So we're not talking about a monetary judgment here. We're just talking about where are people suffering from burden from flights. So a lot of our work related to the distributional fairness. And then we come into the another form of fairness, the procedural fairness. So people are not only just concerned with the outcome of decisions, but more importantly, with the procedures that led to that decision in the first place. And so the research, the environmental justice research and social justice research has suggested that a fair process, if there is a fair process that's seen by everybody, it might have influence over the overall fairness evaluation than just the outcome itself. So people don't like having things done to them. They need to know what is going to be done, what the outcome is going to be, and why decisions have been made in a certain way. And then the final area there is the informational, and we called it the interpersonal fairness. Informational fairness is kind of describes the quality of the explanations given to the people to justify the reasons for making certain decisions. So really the information on which you base those decisions, is it understandable? Is it communicated in a good way? And then the interpersonal fairness focuses on the degree to which people are treated with politeness, dignity, and respect by the decision maker. So we're going to work off those three concepts, because we combine the last two together. So just going through the timeline here. This work started in October 22. Now, it was funded by the UK Civil Aviation Authority, but it was sponsored by Gatwick Airport. So this kind of, if you hear about this work, it might be called the Gatwick Fed Study, because we based a lot of our work around the Gatwick. So we set up an expert review group with 4 diverse members with diverse experience. So their role was to review the task, progress, outcomes, and the project report. And there was 4 on there. And one of them is John Stewart. So John, you're very up with this all the way through. We had someone from air traffic control. We had someone from Germany, a researcher, and then we had actually someone from Manchester Airport as well. And then we went into gathering the information.
If someone's
There's someone in the background there.
since someone who's making a noise turn
Maria.
themselves to mute, it may be you, Maria.
You might be able to do that yourself.
Yeah, I think that's done. Yeah.
Okay. So we had a stakeholder focus group to begin with, and that was sort of getting together a group of people from the aviation industry and asking them about different features, concepts, and barriers to mitigating aircraft noise. Then we had what we call the amenities group, the community noise groups, and we had two of those where we pulled in people from around Gatwick Airport. And again, we put everything together, asked various questions because we needed to design our focus groups. And then we had a community fundamentals workshop where we were prepping everything for the main focus groups and got feedback. And then we moved on to the actual focus groups, and Paul will talk through those. There was 13 community focus groups engaging over 130 members. And it used a virtual airport to explore the concepts, and Paul will explain that later. And then we developed a kind of like a supplementary approach, which we then tested, and then we put the final report together at the end of 2024. There was another area called a Q methodology, which was a different approach where we tried to understand a little bit more about the nuances of attitudes and how they're formed. So those are the key work stages, and I'm hoping Paul is going to appear now, and I will just carry on driving, Paul, and you can tell me next slide. Are you there, Paul?
I am here, thank you.
Oh, that's great. We've done a splendid introduction for you, and we bemoaned the British trains once again. But you're welcome. A particular welcome from Nicole, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
But
I could have done it, Paul, but I'm much happier if you want to do it.
but on you go, Paul.
thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, and apologies for the slight delay in being with you. And thank you very much for the invitation. So, what my job falls to do is to summarize the core research and the findings. So, just to explain that in the first instance, we held a number of focus groups with representatives of noise action groups around Gatwick, and also people drawn from a range of different areas around Gatwick, by way of co-creating the ultimate focus group interventions. So in those focus groups, we were keen to understand drivers for quality of life, both positive and negative in the area, general perceptions of aircraft and aircraft noise, and indeed the issues as people saw them that could arise from airspace modernisation in the UK. They were really useful interactions in terms of informing what we should be doing when we present potential future scenarios, what we call airspace concepts, to the ultimate focus group participants. So they were really critical in the formulation of the what I would describe as the research instrument, which was the specific nature of these focus groups. These latter focus groups, there were 13 of those held in locations around the airport to facilitate participation, and we worked with a professional recruiter to bring people to those locations, and we ran 13 of those with on average 10 participants in each one of those focus groups. The idea of the 13, which is a weird number, granted, but was to represent a full range of noise exposure experience around the airport. So that would be people who live closer in, further out, dominated by arrival and departure noise, or a combination of the two, but also to include locations that at present weren't overflown. They may experience some aircraft noise, but they were not under a flight path. So complete range of experience, both near in and further out from the airport. And those 13 groups we worked through a bunch of scenarios with them using a virtual airport. The idea behind a virtual airport is it would take some of the emotional angst out of looking at the scenario. So in other words, when you see a map, you're not going, where am I? How might it affect me? It was more to facilitate a broader based discussion about what people felt was intuitively fair, or less fair indeed, or what people felt was more equitable. So the scenarios we used were fundamentally a range of propositions. The first one being a relatively simple: what happens if all we do is is fly aircraft more precisely and accurately as a result of airspace modernisation that enables us to fully harness the capability of performance-based navigation. We know that the outcome of that is that aircraft are interfacing with satellite navigation such that they are flying more precisely a prescribed route. What does that actually mean in reality? Well, it means that aircraft follow a narrower corridor around that given route. We then looked at a range of dispersal options to see what that might mean in terms of geographical spread and what it might mean for noise on the ground. So these are the four options, and those dispersal options were increasingly wide dispersal. And the question was, how did people react to those propositions? So if we move to the first one now, Nicolo. So there are a couple of things to bear in mind here. So this right hand of the three images there, the top right hand corner is a representation of the virtual aircraft airport. So what we have here is a runway to the right. We have a departure going to the west, and then turning to the right, to the north, and splitting. So one of those is going ultimately sort of northwards, and the other one is going back to the east. So that was the general scenario, and the wide-based light blue areas are our attempt to recreate noise preferential routes for this route. So in other words, the area in which aircraft would normally be distributed as part of being confined to our noise preferential route system in the UK. In this instance, we have a concentration scenario due to the application of or the harnessing of performance-based navigation. And what you have on the left is just basically a distribution curve. So what it says is we've got a certain amount of aircraft, and those aircraft are spread about.
Shush, everybody! If you're talking, go on mute. Don't you go on mute, Paul? But everybody else.
I'll hang in there. Yeah. So the left-hand image is not a height or anything. That's just a distribution curve. And what it's saying is, under the base scenario, we are distributing aircraft around a corridor that is approximately 3 kilometers wide. And as you might imagine, the majority of those aircraft are nearer the center. So you get the concentration towards the center, but you get these shoulders moving out to the edge of that noise preferential route. If these aircraft fly that route more precisely and consistently, then the concentration focuses towards the center. So what that means is the aircraft are distributed more narrowly, and therefore the number of aircraft nearer the route center line increases. So we concentrate around that center line. And the question was, and we just spoke to community representatives about this, what do you feel about that? I mean, and then intuitively, people recognized that what that meant was that the communities under the center line, who were already the most burdened by noise, got more, and that there would be a potential benefit to those communities further out to the edge of the noise preferential route, because aircraft would move towards the center. And what was interesting is that discussion immediately elicited concerns around the fact that, the most burdened already get more, and the sense that that was unfair, intuitively and inherently unfair. What was really interesting is when we tried to model the consequence of that, so in other words, to actually take a traffic from a given day and superimpose that on the route and then concentrate that traffic. When we did that with using LEQ, and we did a sort of, here's the LEQ footprint before, here's the LEQ after the concentration, and then here's the difference, LEQ showed up no difference. So LEQ as a metric, given this particular scenario, was insensitive to the change that we were looking at. What we then went on to use was a number above metric. In this case, a N65, so that is number of events above 65 decibels. And what became very apparent is that this particular metric was very powerful at illustrating the consequence of the change. So what you have is the original footprint on the left, and as you might imagine, you have more events closer to the airport and closer to the route centre line. And as you move away, the number of events above that level gradually decreases, and eventually you get a no footprint, i.e. there are no events above 65. And it has horns to reflect the fact that this thing is separating down to two subroutes. It splits into two. When you get a concentration of that around that route, what you see, it's difficult to pick up, but it is, if you look closely, it's evident that footprint becomes a bit more squashed. Yeah, so it becomes narrower and longer, reflecting that concentration around the centre. But the most powerful thing is when you then model the difference between those two footprints, and you see quite powerfully exactly what you'd expect to see, that there is an increase in the number of events nearer the route centre line, and there is a reduction at the edges as aircraft movements concentrate towards the middle. So N65 is capturing very powerfully and visually what is going on here. Yeah, so we found that this was a very useful thing, but what was interesting was the discussions with communities already before we showed that image. So we didn't show all this together like this, we did it in a sequential fashion. We'd already had the discussion about, yes, the people near the centre will get more. That was intuitively grasped by people, and they felt uncomfortable about that. And what N65 here seems to speak to was to that concern. So it's a very powerful way of addressing an issue that was immediately identified by communities. And the outcome of that was, we don't like this. Yeah, we think this is intuitively less fair than the current situation. We're burdening the most burdened more, and we think for that reason that this is less fair and likely to result in less socially acceptable outcomes. When we then said, okay, right, so that's less fair, what happens if we push the other way and we deliberately engage with a management strategy that shares the noise burden a bit? How might we do that? Well, these are just simple scenarios that say, right, let's create in the first instance a centre line, subroutes to either side of the centre line, and share the traffic evenly across those three routes, the original one and the two subroutes to the side. These routes are all the distribution stays within the original noise preferential route. And as you can see, what you see there is three now distribution curves, which are lower than the original one and much lower than the concentration concept. Geographically or visually, the map on the top right-hand corner illustrates those areas of concentration, and then we map the N65 footprints again. And what you would expect to happen here is, in contrast to the concentration, instead of a narrowing and extending of the footprint, it gets a bit fatter and it gets a bit shorter. And when you plot the difference in the bottom right-hand corner, as you would expect with the distribution of the aircraft, you find that there is a reduction in the number of noisier events, N65 and above events, towards the centre, but there is an increase towards the edges. But the increase stays generally within the confines of that noise preferential route. That seemed to meet with a sense that was better. That looked more like what we were used to, and people felt more comfortable with it. When we then moved to extend that distribution further by creating more subroutes, so in this case, two subroutes to either side of the centre line, and those subroutes start to move concentration, increase concentration at the edge of the noise preferential route, we saw an obvious greater shortening and widening of the footprint. And you see in the the change in the number of N65 events on the bottom right-hand corner, a more dramatic decrease towards the middle and a more dramatic increase to the edges of those N65 events. So again, the metric's very good at capturing what's going on and highlighting what the change will be. And what became apparent in these conversations were two things. As soon as you start to move to greater spreading, which could mean greater sharing, people began to feel nervous about the extent of change from what people were already used to. Even though they acknowledged that this would spread the burden more evenly, there was a concern because the current experience is the lived experience, that this might be more of a challenge because it represents a bigger change for people. Even though those near the centre, their burden would be reduced and there would be a more even spread. So what was interesting was that the perception of fairness wasn't being driven by equality, it was being driven by the change to the current position. And this is what was quite a distinctive feature of the conversation, that the equity part of the fairness and equity soon became a sub-story. What became the dominant feature of the conversation was fairness was about the degree of change from what we're used to. And if we make those changes bigger, then the chances are they will conflict with lived experience and people will find that a greater challenge. Now, that does present some issues for us. There's no doubt about that, because, one way of reducing the impact of a noise burden is to move it to places where there's less people. But if those people have previously not experienced noise, then it's going to be a big change for them. So this is what was coming out in the wash of this. One way of highlighting that was the last sharing option, where in addition to that creation of sub-routes, we then said, what about putting a new route in, a relief route in, to take some of that traffic? And the modelling here is simply that you put a third of the traffic down each of those routes. So there's nothing complicated in that. It's just a simple sharing across the three routes, but you put traffic down a route which previously didn't exist. And what you see here, both in the shape of the N65 and in the difference in the N65, is quite a radical change to the original footprint. Again, you see a significant change for the better to those who had previously been most exposed, but you were then creating quite significant increases on the inside of the curve for those who'd already had some noise experience of N65s, but to those to the left, to the east there, this is a creation of noise intrusion in that they are above 65 decibels in an area that had previously not been experiencing those levels of noise. And this is the point at which people got the nervousness around it, social acceptability of that increased. People began to say things like, what if that they're living in an area of tranquility? Will this be a massive change to what they're used to? Is it fair if people have planned their lives around existing routes and deliberately move to areas where they're trying to avoid being overflown to suddenly get overflown? And there seem to be more and more things coming out in the conversation to imply that this would be a bigger challenge socially to accept. So that enabled us to try and capture that. So there's the sort of thing that emerged from this was, one, this degree of change in the spatial distribution. Remember, that's it. The total amount of traffic in all of these scenarios stays the same. We're talking about where we put it. So this is the distributional effect that was important. And the N65, and to be fair, this using an N60 or an N70 would do the same thing. It would just move the concentration of focus further out or closer into the airport. But this number above metric seemed to be particularly powerful at capturing the feature that people seem to be most bothered about, which is the degree of change, which is the right-hand column, the difference column there. And it highlighted and illustrated quantitatively and objectively those things that people were emotionally bothered about, i.e., what was going to affect their lives, or they felt would affect the lives of residents who were, even those who were benefiting as well as those who were getting a disbenefit from this. So the point here is distributional change is important in influencing social acceptability. And generally speaking, a lot of our analysis look at aggregate changes, the totality of change, not the distribution therein. And it seems to be that in that distribution, we find people being concerned about the fairness of outcomes, the creation of, put crudely, winners and losers from a scenario. Yeah. So, very powerful way of highlighting that. This then allows, we hope, provides the robust evidence for people, for communities to understand the consequences of a change, and most importantly then, to form their own opinions about how fair or unfair that seems to be. And that's the key driver here. It's about empowering people to understand the consequences of a change when it might not be clearly illustrated by other means. Can move on to the next one, Nicola. So how does this contribute to fairness and equity? For first of all, it helped us have a discussion about distributional fairness, which is really important, and we got clear and pretty consistent messages from communities regardless of their pre-existing experience. So this is for noise-affected communities, for less noise-affected communities, and for those who are currently not overflown. We even had comments of, well, if that happened here, we might be a bit worse off, but actually we can understand the benefit of a scenario where there is some limited degree of sharing to avoid the worst consequences of concentration. The other thing is that we felt that it is in the distribution of these, the spatial changes therein, that we found the most powerful drivers for perceptions of fairness. As a consequence of that, we were able to think about, well, what are the relative risks of social acceptability of outcomes, and we were able to sort of conceptualize a spectrum of that, which comes next, I hope. No, it doesn't. Let's go to that one. Anyway, thanks, Nico. So what we're saying is the summary here is that if we go from a current position where there is a natural distribution of aircraft as a result of navigational performance and our current airspace technology, we get a distribution around this, within this noise preferential route. If we just simply allow the technology to concentrate that traffic, then we move to a situation which, generally speaking, is defined as being less acceptable, less fair, and therefore poses a higher risk of social unacceptability. If we intervene deliberately to try and distribute that traffic, then we move to a lower risk position. But at some point, as we distribute wider and wider, that starts to become more and more risky because people become concerned about the degree of change that might represent for communities in the area. So that's what we're trying to capture. Now, subplots within that were things like, if that distribution, that sharing happens over areas that are important, areas of outstanding natural beauty are one that we encounter around Gatwick, for example. If they are areas that are associated with tranquility for the residents and or for people to move to those areas, who move and utilize those areas because they are peaceful areas and they get benefit for that, maybe as a transient visitor, but nevertheless that is a benefit, then that becomes an issue. It makes the concerns, if you like, exacerbates those concerns. So we have somewhere in here, and I suspect, or we suspect as a group, that this will be determined by the particular locale, but somewhere there may be a sweet spot in this sort of sharing where we get some sharing that avoids the worst consequences of concentration, but avoids the the risks associated with overflying new areas, exposing people newly to significant increases in noise intrusion. So that was where we got to, and the feeling at this point was how if the driver here for acceptability or concern, however you want to put it, it is to do with the degree of change, the degree of spatial change or distributional change, then what we need to produce to support evaluations of real, as opposed to conceptual airspace change proposals, is some framework to assist in illustrating the degree of change. And that's effectively what we did as we moved on to our framework. And the hope was that it would address some of these things. So if we can produce a framework for evaluating airspace change options, which is not the be all and end all, it's just another evaluative step in the process. There are other evaluations that go on in as we seek to identify preferred options here. What we're saying is this is a facet that needs to be part of that evaluation, because it's a facet that bothers people. It's a facet that has a direct impact on communities around airports. And if we are open about that and we have a framework which can illustrate the nature of those changes, our hope is that it helps people understand what the consequences of propositions might be. It allows them to get to form their own informed opinion about how they feel about it. And ideally, there is a procedure in which they feel that their views are taken into account, i.e. they are involved in the decision making. If that goes on, to my mind, that will help address an area of concern and mistrust that we know has built up between communities and airports, where there is a sense that there is the use of metrics which obscure issues that are most important to people. This says if distributional effects are important to people, we need to illustrate them. We need to say, look at these. This would be the consequence. Form your opinion about how bad, how good, how acceptable, how unacceptable it is. It is not the job of the likes of myself to tell people whether it's acceptable or unacceptable, but it is my job, if I can do it well, and the job of the likes of Anderson, who are foursquare behind this, to support in the presentation of information which empowers people to form opinion and understand the outcome of the potential outcome of a proposition. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we had to wrestle with this, I'll be honest with you, as we moved on. What we recognised was that these N65s, these number above, had been particularly powerful in capturing objectively the issue that people were concerned about. So we developed a framework which said, let's recognise that that's important, but if we can capture the degree of change in a more powerful way, then maybe that's a helpful thing to do as well. So what we have here is a number of stages which we feel will be useful to include in any assessment of airspace change options. And the first is to start with the operational stuff, so people understand what the hell's going on. So what are the physical changes that are going to drive a potential change in noise exposure on the ground? Let's be clear about them. Let's illustrate that noise exposure in a way that is very easy to comprehend, and let's then think about what the degree of change that would result from those patterns of N65s. So here we have a scenario which is again a relatively simple one. It's a bit small for me, but I'm hoping you guys see it a bit better. But I am currently open with two screens, trying to remind myself of what I want to say to each of these slides. So hopefully you guys will see it a little bit clearer than me.
Well, I don't know if you can hear me, but it's already 5:45, so
yeah.
I'm at the level of what we go into with this.
Fair dues, yeah. So in essence, what we were saying here, we went through the sort of scenarios that might happen with airspace change. So we have an existing route to the north here, which goes out to the west, beg your pardon, and then turns in a easterly direction. And we said, what happens if we continue to fly that with PBN capability? So in other words, with enhanced airspace navigational technology, or what happens if we move it? And in this case, the scenarios are that we move half of it to a loop round to the south, we move all of it to a loop round to the south, or we stay with the northern route, but with PBN. And as you can see with those, we've got the original route at the top, and then we've got a taking half the traffic to the south.
Just to interrupt you for a second, Paul, we've got a hand raised by Matt, so it...
Yeah, happy to take that, Matt. Fire away.
We'll do so at the end of your presentation, but I want to be the first.
You want to be first? Okay.
Good man. Yeah, good man.
Actually, I have two hands.
Paul has told me you'll be speaking within a few minutes, Matt.
Okay. Thank you.
So what we're saying here is what we can do is the footprint. That's a purple picture. So as you can see, we've got a distribution that goes to the north at the moment, and then all of a sudden we get a southern loop as we put some and then all of the traffic on the southern loop, or we stick with running a PBN version of the northern the route to the north and then back to the east. Again, we can see with these difference maps underneath, where you've got the green and the orange, is it picks up on half the traffic going to the south, all of the traffic going to the south, and sticking with the original route. There's a slight change on the original route because the curve, for various modelling reasons, wasn't quite the same as the original one. But what you see, so green and yellow are improvements, and red improvements, reduction in the number of events, and the yellow and red to the south is an increase in number. What we did here, and this is where it's going to get complicated, so I'll not
Don't go into too much detail.
But what we tried to do here was to say, actually, if people are bothered about the scale of change for areas, then it's important to understand that if you were in a relatively low exposure area, a small number of increased events is likely to be more observable, more impactful than if you were exposed to a large number of events. So what we did was we put these N65 events into bands, and as you go down this list of bands, you will see that there are more events in each of the bands. So the banding becomes less sensitive. Yeah, it takes a bigger change to shift a band, and the reason there is that we felt that that people who were exposed to larger number of events would be less sensitive to small changes in events than those who experience fewer. So there we have some categories, we have some bands, then that allows us to introduce some rules about what happens if you move between bands. So it allows us to identify newly exposed, those with increases, and those who benefit with reductions, and those who are removed from exposure. So that gives us another powerful way of illustrating, driven by that same N65 metric. Here we introduce population, so we can start to quantify the population exposed to or benefiting from reduction or removal from exposure, or those populations that are have got increased numbers of N65s and indeed are newly exposed to N65. So it's a powerful way of capturing the degree of change and indeed the number of people involved. And if you get very clever, you can then multiply the number of people by the number of events and come up with what is described as a total noise load, which is a person event index, and you can use that to sort of quantify the totality. So the number of people and number of events multiplied gives you the person events in a given location, and that's another way of trying to powerfully illustrate this. And that's us highlighting that. The big thing here is that what becomes interesting is that the difference in the PEI, it seems to be a key driver. It speaks to this question of degree of change, not just what you start with and what you end with, but but the change. And this is just highlighting that in these different features. I'm not going to go into them because it would take me a good half an hour to do that. So I think all we're saying is we have got a range of ways of illustrating the degree of change, which we hope will be beneficial to communities to look with some transparency on different airspace change proposals.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. And Nicole, before you.
Yeah, I will go through it very quickly and just let
Okay,
everybody
right.
read. So I know it's probably an opportunity to ask questions. So we do have some recommendations for the airports, all about community engagement and what they like, how they might like to fit this in to discussing between options and using this extra information on the whole process from the beginning to the end, and using these differences, that people can then be informed to work out what might be fair to some and between the different options. So I'm going to stop there and maybe open it up to some questions. There's a lot in there, but hopefully we've covered the basics. And if that piques your interest, you can go and look at the rest of the report. I just want to,
I don't
yeah.
think that slideshow's completely ended. I think you need
Oh,
to you need to you
oh,
need to
there we
click
go.
to exit.
Oh, okay, right. Let me just go and stop sharing. Hopefully it'll
Yeah.
give options. Oh, here we go. Share. Oh, they're all coming on here. Okay, what are you saying now?
It's still saying sharing at the moment.
Oh, okay, right. Let me see if I can get rid of all of this.
You might need to go to slideshow and end it there.
Oh, end it. Okay. Or maybe I can close that off. That
Yeah.
ended it?
No, you're still sharing for reasons I don't.
Oh, right. Well, where's it hiding? Where is it hiding?
I think maybe if you click on
Oh, I
slideshow.
need to go back here, I think maybe, and hit get rid of my screen. No, we're going to.
No, go to yeah, that's it.
You've
That's
done
it.
it. Done
I've
it.
got
Well
it.
done.
I sorted it.
Yeah, excellent. Listen, thank you both very much indeed. Now, there's a number of hands up. Matt is definitely going to be number one. Otherwise, there'll be a revolution in Amsterdam. And I think that is followed by Armel and then Stephen. And if other people want to speak, just raise your hands. We might go on a little bit after after our hour is up, if there are a number of questions. Matt, far away.
I got already an answer to my first question, and that is
Excellent.
that finally that is the relationship between the number of people affected or benefiting when you want to impose, I would say, this system. Because to give you an example, in the Netherlands we have 5 runways, and the distribution is already in a way that cannot be changed very much. And that means that if you ask people, well, if I ask you where do you live, you can tell me what you think about this solution. How are you going to implement this solution when the benefits might be marginal? I think it's very important to have those measurements about number above and instead of LDEN criteria, but still the question is, have you been successful in redistributing? Change is always difficult. And did you get the results by this system?
Yeah, I think the critical point here is that this isn't a solution. Yeah, this is not a solution. What this is saying is that if the redistribution of aircraft is critical to people's quality of life and their perception of the fairness of an outcome, then we need to address that in any assessment. So that needs to be part of the conversation as we make changes. And at present, there really isn't a lot of looking at the redistribution effects. So this is, we hope, a mechanism by which that can enter into the debate more effectively, because we believe it's quite important to people. I would say one thing that I glossed over. Well, I probably didn't even gloss over it. I just didn't mention it, and that was the question of growth, the question of the absolute number of aircraft, and when you look at a sharing regime and you say, well, that reduces the number of aircraft that an area experiences, of course, that could be eroded by future growth. Yeah. So it was very interesting and I think perceptive that these communities who weren't airspace change specialists whatsoever were very clear that the issue of growth and sharing can't be separated. Yeah. So the absolute numbers, so in other words, what you were sharing and how you share it, are part of the same conversation. And if it may well be that if airports are negotiating with communities around the future, that has to include a conversation around what is the ceiling, what's an acceptable ceiling for growth, if there is one. So I think that is a really important thing, that it isn't just about sharing, it is about understanding that the absolute numbers being shared may change over time, and that needs to be part of the same conversation.
It's probably worth saying as well is we are talking about the relative risks of unacceptability. So what we're actually saying is if something is happening and there's a number of different routes that are being looked at, if you want to assess the fairness, it's the relative fairness of those three routes, as opposed to an absolute fairness. And this helps give information on which to have a discussion. So you then understand what's going on in the area and how how the different routes are affecting the local population.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Armel and then Stephen.
Yes, good evening, Nico. We've got a problem. I live on the third runway at Heathrow Airport, and at Heathrow we've got three problems. We've got not only PBN, we've got airspace modernization, and we've got the third runway. So mine is a social question. How do we actually alert all the people, millions of them around London and the Southeast, who are going to be impacted by all three or any one of them? Thank you.
Well, it's a good question, but it's a hard one to answer, Armel. It's essentially reaching.
How do you reach to the
it's something which airports have struggled with for a long, long time, and certainly when I was at Haytown, we struggled with as well. How to reach not so much the existing people, Armel, because they're aware of the situation and like yourself, they speak up, but the potentially new people who will be affected. Now, some of that came out in your research, didn't it?
Well, I think one of the things here has to be some honesty in the way in which you present information. To my mind, you can't talk about a new runway without putting some routes on it and let people see where aircraft fly, because that's immediately going to show you. Because aircraft don't disappear when they go past the outer contour. Yeah, they're still there. This was something that was absolutely illustrated in Sydney when they opened the third runway, and there was not quite blood on the streets, but it was getting close, and that was because people had been presented with images which were LEQ based, and because they were outside of that contour, the outer contour, they felt it wouldn't be an issue. Well, of course, that's not true. We know that. You're overflown beyond those contours. So we need some honesty in the way that's presented. So some maps which highlight that, and indeed what sort of level of traffic is going to happen. So what does that mean for existing traffic on existing routes? What does it mean for new? But you're right, Armel. I mean, there's no doubt if you put a new runway in and it's happened in Amsterdam as have been acknowledged, you are going to newly expose people. It's unavoidable because you're going to put aircraft where they have not previously been. So the question then is, what is that going to look like? What is the management structure around that? Are there ways in which that impact can be minimised? But there will be an impact. I mean, we can't pretend that won't be the case. And I just hope that the conversation around that is as open as it can be, and we enter into a proper social contract. Whether people are going to be happy, I mean, there's not going to be, there's going to be a lot of unhappy people, and sadly,
true and honesty have never come together.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
I can't speak for Heathrow, and I wouldn't want to, but yeah, I appreciate this history there. Yeah.
Well, I can.
Okay, and so can Stephen. So let's move on to Stephen.
Stephen, you're on mute, mate.
You're on mute, Stephen. You're on mute.
First of all, good to
That's
see
it.
you. Good to see you all. Thank you for the presentation, which I thought was absolutely excellent. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
We
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
can.
You're
nice
Very
to
well.
see
Okay,
you as well,
I'll try
Stephen.
and make just one or two very quick observations. I mean, you're absolutely. This is a brilliant assessment about how you could deal with airspace change and PBN if there wasn't expansion. But where you've got expansion at Gatwick, which is a second runway, and where you've got a third runway at Heathrow, putting up nearly 60% additional air traffic movements, then I think obviously this is still relevant analysis to carry out. But I think you will need to start looking at thresholds where it gets completely unacceptable, and that does take you in a certain direction. The other observation I'd make is, given where we are in the UK with the proposals for UCADs, it looks as if the airports, the local
Just
airports,
to
might
explain,
not be
Stephen,
involved.
just to explain that UCAS is the body that will be overseeing the airspace change in the UK.
Sorry, John, I glossed over that, but I'm conscious of time. I just wanted to say that
Yeah.
we've had correspondence with the CA and Stuart Lindsay and Ian Elston, and it's quite clear that they want to take over. That is within UCADS, which is essentially NATS, the all the airspace change proposals through the third phase. So, how far the airports are going to be allowed to get into this type of debate is a question, but it's a very, very good subject, I think, to try and introduce proper engagement. So I thank you for that. But I think there are some real issues about absolute thresholds and about maintaining a role for airports and for understanding their hinterlands, which might be lost.
Yeah.
So that's
No, I think I couldn't agree more. I mean, I hope I did justice to the focus group comments, which was that you can't, if you're talking about distribution, you cannot divorce that conversation from what you're distributing. Yeah, and that has to be a negotiated outcome, I believe. And clearly, airports will seek to expand, but we need to look at the technology, the benefits that we could get from that. What seems to be a reasonable balance between that desire for increased activity and what that means for people living around those places. And the bottom line is that the benefits of future technology should be being shared with communities. It shouldn't just be a one-way street. Now, whether or not you can find a sweet spot there, I don't know, and I'm sure there will be massive challenges in there. But you're right. We do need to recognise that this conversation happens in an environment of a desire to expand air traffic services. Yeah.
If you look at the report a little closer as well, we didn't introduce it here for lack of time, but we have a hierarchy of risks. And the first thing is about not increasing the health burden. So obviously, if you are going to expand and you increase the number of people exposed, the likelihood of increasing the overall health burden by using the dose response relationships, then that would be your first. That's the bottom bit. That's like the most risky bit. And then you go on to, well, actually, if you've got a choice between routes, then have a look at the relative risks. So we didn't highlight that bit. It doesn't completely disconnect expansion from choices, but there is that element that we try to bring in there.
good points, Nicole. And I just think that it's a shame we haven't got really very good research in terms of where does health impact start and where does annoyance stop. There's a very unclear, I think, distinction between the two.
Yeah.
If you listen to what the quiet skies would say, they see as a continuum. It's not necessarily a separation.
No. Yeah.
And actually, some useful work has been done, Stephen, in the University of Mainz. We had Thomas Munsell speaking at an earlier webinar, and also his colleague Omar Had, and both of them are wrestling with this problem. So it's worth contacting them. They're very user friendly. Right. I see a virtual hand from Sally and a real hand from Elaine. So we'll go to Sally first.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon or good evening. Hello, Paul. Know you well from Gatwick. Fazes. So the Department of Transport has briefed ministers that the public will have to absorb the cost of the burden of modernisation of airspace. There will be no compensation. This is a DfT advice to the ministers. There cannot be any compensation for loss of house value or anything, because it will delay the modernisation of airspace and it will cost too much on top of the modernisation of airspace. And that is without any new runways. So where is the balanced approach? ICAO talk about balanced approach, policy talks about balanced approach, you're talking about balanced approach. Where is the balanced approach when aviation is going to get everything out of FASs, everything, and yet the burden of the cost on people's lives is being briefed that it doesn't matter. Airspace modernisation has to come way above any financial losses to residents. So I think, you know, you're obviously, I've seen the work that you've done around Gatwick, etc. But that coming from the DfT doesn't give us much hope. And UCADS is going to be working with the airports on engagement, because they believe, the CAA believe that the airports are best placed to know how to reach out to the local people.
Just to remind, thanks, Sally, and just to remind people again that particularly if you're not from the UK, the UCADS is a strange name of the body that is coordinating the airspace change in the UK. Paul, I don't know whether you want to respond, or Nicole respond to that, and then we'll take Elaine.
I mean, you raised some absolutely pertinent issues, Sally. It's a challenging thing in theory. The technology advances should mean that, and we've seen this, that there is a reduced burden, exposure burden. The problem we have is how we look at that exposure burden. When we look at it through the lens of LEQ, which we certainly do when it comes to exposure response functions, I don't think that captures everything, and I think that's problematic in itself. But it should be incumbent upon the airspace sponsors, airspace change sponsors, that materially people, the communities, wherever possible, are not worse off. Now, whether or not that's going to will out, I don't know. I haven't got a crystal ball. I do understand your concerns around the dominance of growth at all costs. I think the reality here is that is something we will have to see. At a personal level, my aim here, to involving myself in this work, was very much to focus on things that were critically important to communities, and to assist them welling out in conversation and in assessments. Is that all for naught? I hope not, but I do understand the cynicism and the criticism of based on those who live closer to airports than I do. So I understand the frustration. Is all I can say. I don't think that's much solace to you, Sally, but yeah, I can see where you're coming from.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. Well, Elaine, you've talked eloquently and passionately about living under a concentrated flight path,
Absolutely.
a very concentrated flight path in New
Absolutely.
York. So it's only right, I think, you perhaps have the last word.
I want to thank you both for your presentation. It was very, very interesting. There were a lot of questions that I had, and I hope that we have the opportunity to meet again so we can expand on the questions. But coming from a person who has the lived experience of living under a concentrated flight path, there are some basic parts that I was not sure that you covered. Number one would be the frequency of flights over homes, the altitudes of those flights over those homes. These are very critical issues that needs to be addressed, because frequency has a lot to do with the impact that your communities will be experiencing. And Also, we do have the same problem here, and we call them NIMBYs, not in my backyard. The people who are up in arms, just for the fact that perhaps if they're going to disperse the planes, that they are up in arms. So I just wanted to give you that little bit of information. We do refer them as NIMBYs. But these are, I think that these are critical issues that have to be addressed as far as, living under a constricted flight path. And the fact that the people that do live under a constricted flight path get all of the noise, all of it, because it is in a corridor. We call it the highway in the skies. That's how we refer to it. And I live in New York, the New York area actually, but I live in a suburb on Long Island. So starting in 2012, we had our modernization of our airspace, and it creates an unlivable environment. So when you take the testimony of people who are living under flight paths, I think it has to be really considered. And, I understand the modeling, a lot of people use the modeling. That's what our FAA does also. And I don't really believe that it becomes that accurate, because the people who do live under a flight path, and I'm just going to give you an example of one of our last noise reports. And also wind direction has a lot to do with your dispersion and so on and so forth, which I see that you did not mention. That's why I'd like to, further this conversation. But I just want to say that the communities for one of our flight paths, arrivals to JFK, in the month of July, those communities under that constricted flight path, the same communities, the same houses, the same people, received over 13,000 flights over their homes in 1 month. Now that is staggering. And that creates an environment that is not an annoyance, okay? It becomes an unhealthy, unlivable environment for the people. So so I would like to leave it at that, and perhaps we can further our discussions and, open up, further discussions on this subject. So I thank you very, very much for your time.
Thanks, Elaine, and thanks for bringing that to life. I think hopefully the metrics that we are using does talk about frequency, because it talks about the number of events in a given time. So it would show that up. It would show up, powerfully the increase burden on those near the centre of the route, as a result of that concentration. And
that we chose N65. It could have been an N60, an N70, and N55, and then that would play more into the altitude as well.
Yeah.
That's one of those points. Sorry, carry on, Paul.
No, I just, I mean, the very essence of the conversations that we had with communities was around what you've experienced there, and then where they said, look, this, of all the scenarios, this looks to be the least fair, where you burden the already most burdened more. And I think anybody faced with that would probably intuitively say that isn't on, really. How we can disperse to a degree that doesn't cause excessive aggravation across a wider population is the question here. How you do it practically, and how you model it to actually deliver the benefit of some dispersal, to avoid the worst excesses of what you're highlighting there, Elaine, is, I think, the challenge that our work, sheds light on. And I think it potentially does erode some of the efficiency benefits for the industry and etc. And a simple space change, it makes for a more complicated picture. But the question that I would pose to the industry is, what we're hearing from communities is we should be putting some time and effort into that. Yeah.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. Elaine, I think it may be possible for I can arrange for you to speak at more length with Paul and Nicole, offline, so we can put something together there. Well, listen, thank you again, Paul, Nicole. Thank you all for your contributions. The webinar has been recorded, as you know, and will be online in the next day or two on the UECNA website. If people are not members of UECNA, we always welcome you to join us. So just you can do that through the website. We haven't got an exact date or topic for our next webinar. We are in discussion with a number of people, and it just depends on their availability, but there almost certainly will be one in the next couple of months. So thank you all very much again. And I think it's good night, certainly to those of you in Europe. It's good morning to those of you in America, and wishing those in America a nice lunch. So goodbye.
Thank you very much.